Good morning. Hemshech Tzadik Daled, the bottom of page 165, which corresponds to Ayin Beis, volume 2, page 1158. Yeah. So now we're going to return to where he began with a third level and type of Bitul in Oyer called Efes Biltecha, where the entire Oyer is nothing but Atzmus expression. We called it earlier Yochid, the level of Metzius, which is a Metzius only because it's not the Atzmi, but it's not a Metzius la'atzmi, it's only, doesn't have any substance of its own, and therefore does not negate anything else. And he also called it Nekudah. The last is Nekudah Kav Shetach, the Nekudah, which is still beyond details and still in a state of shapelessness. Now you have to say, yesterday we learned the moshel he gave of a Chacham Gadol, a great wise one, who thinks in context of hafshata, ideas that are stripped from their details, and to the point that you can have two contradictory, two different and opposite theories. It can contain all of that, and then it develops into a kav, into more shape, until it finally becomes very concrete into the specific ideas that are unique and do negate another. And that idea, the other idea negates it. In other words, it's a very defined and limited opinion in a particular way. So I was going to say, you have to say that the highest level of, when he spoke about the highest level of Oyer, and he spoke that it's not even a Metzius, like he said, Lo Yeha v'Lo Yeha. It's only not Atzmi. Nekudah, even though it's an example for it, but Nekudah is already something that you can talk about. So I think it's an example for level 3. It's not necessarily exactly level 3. That's what it appears to me as he explains it. In other words, you say Torah Shebiksav is the Nekudah, the written Torah. Mishnah is a Kav. Brings more detail, but it's still somewhat amorphous. At the end of the day, Torah Shebiksav is true. It's Chachmas Shal Kadosh Baruch Hu, and it's completely bottled talakus. But I don't know if the Etzem Eir that he's talking about is actually that level, or is that an example of that level, relatively speaking? Now, obviously, in the root, Torah Shebiksav, if you go all the way to the root of it, it's the Etzem Eir, as he's explaining. Okay, just wanted to make that point. Now he's going to bring it back now and say these three levels correspond to the three Efanim and Bitul of the Oyer. So he's going to say it like this now. I'm reading around the 15 lines from the bottom, actually 10 lines from the bottom. 3, yeah. After he finished the Nekudah Kav Shetach and Seichel, from complete abstraction to some halbosha, some dressing up in details, the Mishnah, all the way to the final details, like he said, who says lose. So now he goes back and says, V'zehu efes biltecha. This is now going to explain efes biltecha, which goes back to the third level of Bitul that he began all the way the beginning of the Maimer, page 159. Eifan hashlishel b'Bitul ha'Oyer. The Eifan ha'Gimel, the third type, the Bitul ha'Oyer, in the Bitul, in the nullification or the selflessness of Oyer, Shehu Efes Biltecha, which is the level called Efes Biltecha, nothing. Absolutely Efes, more than Ayin. Efes Biltecha, without you. Hunayla Harbe Yeser Ma Bitul Be'efen HaBeis, is far higher and loftier and greater Then the second level of Bittul, Bittul, the Ayin, the Ve'ein Zuloscha, that there's nothing else besides you. And now, based on what we learned, he's going to sum up now to explain that. The Hine, because now, Hagimel Efani Bitlehem Begimel in Yon Ha'er. The three levels of Bittul we've been learning till now are in these three levels of Eir. The Bittul, the head that Tfisas Mokim, Bittul number one, the Bittul of no standing, which was Hu HaBittul Bispashtus Levad. That was only the nullification, only in its expression. It's an extension. The candle doesn't have any function and expression in the light of the sun, but it still exists. That's level one in Bittul. The Be'inyan Ha'er Hu HaBittul Ba'gili Sho'in HaShetach. In Eir, this level of Bittul is the Bittul that comes in the Gilui. Remember the word Gilui, there's Metzius and Kiyum Gilui, there's Nekudah Kav Shetach. So he says this level of Bittul is in the Gilui of, is a Bittul Ba'gili Sho'in HaShetach. Shetach means a plane. There's an expression, there's an extension here. There's Eirach and Rechav, there's length and width. The Chol Iyin Hagili Hu B'Shetach Bilvad. The whole Ayin of Gilui, when you say something is revealed has parameters. When you say lower level, the higher levels of Kav and Nekudah, Gilui is far less than those levels. But when you say something is fully revealed, in this case, the Eir is in a revealed state, he says that's Shetach. He's not connecting the third level Gilui to Shetach. That's plain. There's an expansion, not just an extension. Vav, remember, the Kav is an extension. The two different ways we learned. But it's still Nekudus. Here you're talking about an expansion. Shetach, so that's Gilui. Ukumaya hefresh ben Gilui ner cotton or ner godel v'avuka. Like we see the difference between the revelation, the light that comes from a ner cotton, a small candle, a ner godel, a great candle or flame, v'avuka, a great candle, a large candle, and a v'avuka, a torch. There's a difference between them. The ner cotton, a small candle, the air that comes from it, the illumination that comes from it, is only affects the space near it, because it's a small light. It doesn't extend very far. So it could illuminate a certain limited space right near that flame. The ner godel, a large flame, a large candle, what is the Gilui defined by? That it reaches further, it illuminates more. So you light a candle, a small candle, you can illuminate, let's say, 10 feet. 10 square feet. You light a large candle, it illuminates 100 square feet, just as an example. Va'avuka, and a torch, which is even a greater flame, me'ira l'marachik. That can radiate and illuminate even a distance, even more than the 100 square feet that I just gave the example. The numbers are my own. They don't necessarily, it could be less or more, but the point is that Gilui of Oyer is defined by Shetach. Shetach means the area, the plane that it reaches. V'chol inyan hakiru v'arichuk. And this whole inyan of illuminating closer area, v'arichuk, and a more distant, hurak inyan shitchi. That only applies in the context of a Shetach. There is an area, which is another word for plane. An area is more than just a point or a line. It's an area, it's a full area. Area is defined by square feet if it's in physical. If it's in seichel, it means an idea that is both extended and expanded. V'hainu, so going back now to what is this level of Bittul? Hainu, that Bittul rak bispashtus levad. So inyan shitchi, actually there's also a word inyan shitchi sometimes you use when you say something is only superficial. So you say b'shitchius. meaning only on the external space of it. But here, he means, he doesn't mean it in a superficial way, he means the outer expression of it. And that's what the Bittul of, the first level of Bittul of Ayin Heder Tfisas Mokim. Because the thing exists, the light continues to exist, its function. So it's only its expansion. The candle is there even in the light of the sun. It just doesn't have any effect. In other words, it doesn't spread, whether it's close or distant. So whether it's a small candle or a large candle or a torch, all of them pale in comparison to the sun, but it's only in their functionality, in their Shetach, not in the etzem oyer, not in the etzem thing that they exist. It's only in their expansion, spashtus, because Shetach is the definition of Gilui. So you have here all the explanations: Heder Tfisas Mokim, Gilui, and Shetach. Bitul be'efen ha-Beis. And here the three words are going to be Kiyum, Kav, and is the Bittul that is that the Oyer itself feels that it is dependent entirely on the source. He says the Bittul from the Efen HaBeis, the second type, Husha Bittul Negei Gam B'Metzius. That Bittul also affects the very existence of the Oyer, not just its expansion. Shahu Inyan HaKav. That's the Kav. That relates to the line. Asherhu kiyume shala'ir. That is what substantiates, and that is what establishes the oir. Because if it remains a nekudah, it remains completely elusive and not yet drawn into anything. The kav is that in-between place where the nekudah is already now extending itself, whether it's extending to one student, explaining that detail with examples, like you said, Eifana Aleph in the Kav, or Eifana Beis, like the Mishnah, that is made up of more details and is dissecting the details in the first Nekudah. This is Kiyum Shala'er, next page 166, V'hainu, and this means the Kol Kiyum Shala'er Mitzad Mekere. The entire establishment, the entire sustenance of this light is only due to its source. So he's mixing now the word kiyum in different ways. In the first level of Bittul, the candle is not dependent on the source. It's just overshadowed by the source. So it affects the Shetach. The light doesn't spread. The light doesn't expand when it's in the light of the sun. Tfisas Mokim, Heder Tfisas Mokim. Here, the oyer is a substantial oyer. It's been established, but its entire existence is only mitzad mekere, due to its source. So for itself, it's not existence at all. It's entirely dependent on its source. Like a kav, which all it is revealing revealing the details within the initial spark, the initial point. This may need more explanation, but let's see let's finish the point and then I'll go back and explain. Bittul be'efen ha'gimel, and the bittul, the nullification, or the bittul, the sublimation. In the third type of shehu habittul be'efes biltecha. Efes, absolutely nothing, biltecha, without you. Hine bittul zeh hu benekudah sa'er. This bittul is in the point of the oyer, where the oyer doesn't have any, not oyrach and not rechev, no extension and no expansion. Shu etzem hametzius, says the etzem hametzius muhus ha'er. The etzem hametzius muhus ha'er. Interesting expression, etzem hametzius muhus. Does he mean metzius hamuhus? I don't think so. The actual, the only the thing is, it exists. Something has come into existence, but the bare minimum, metzius muhus ha'er. Shehu b'chinas Gilui min ha'etzem. This is a revelation from the core. Yesh eit kolol ba'etzem, being that it's still encompassed within the etzem. So all it is an expression of the etzem. The second level is, as we learned with Esses Sfiris after the Tzimtzum, it already becomes some type of definition. It's just still amorphous. And therefore it's still, like he says, dependent on its source. But there's something has emerged. Here, it's etzem mitzim Yesh Biltul it became mashe Yesh nehuraka etzem bilvad. And therefore, all that exists is only the etzem as it's now manifest in what I explained the Metzius nimtza of Oyer. V'hainu, the klol is be'inyan bitla eir. So now he's going back to the words that we concluded before with Ayin Beis, that in general, all three levels, klol isina bitla eir u'mipnei galos hamoker v'dvekas ha'oyer ba'amoyer. All the levels of Bittul is because Oyer, as in contrast to Yesh, which does not have the source revealed in it, is the revelation of the source and the attachment of the Oyer in the Moyer, in the luminary, in the source of the Oyer. El the Bittul zeh. So all three are due to that awareness and connection. But however, in this Bittul itself, Yesh Gimel Eifanim. There are three types. Shema Bittul begimel ha'inyanim. That's the Bittul in the three things. Metzius and Nekudah. That's one. Metzius and Nekudah. Kav v'Kiyum. V'Shetach v'Gilui shebe'er. And Shetach and Gilui shebe'er. Here he's going from the top down. So here's how he sums up this whole idea. And the questions he asked are answered. We now know the difference between level 1, 2, and 3, and even 2 and 3. It's clear now what he meant, that when he said, what's the difference between the third level and Atzmus? Because Atzmus is all of Atzmus. And this is only Oyer, and it's the first step. You can't call it Atzmus, it's not, but you can't call it anything but Atzmus. So it's only a Gilui in that, that's what Oyer is in this third level. In other words, when he said that question, Atzmus is beyond, it's built to Metzius Nimtza, it's beyond anything. The first level of Oyer, even though there's no existence, you call it Metzius, he said, because you have something, but the something is a nothing, basically. Okay, so it's a Nekudah, Kav, and Shetach, Metzius, Kiyum, and Gilui. What perhaps needs some explanation is the second level. He says the Kav is Kiyum Shala'er, called Kiyum Shala'er Mitzad Mekere. So let me explain that a bit with the example of Teresh B'Ksav, Mishnah and Gemara. In Chassidus it explains, and I think it'll help us understand this, that the three levels of Teresh B'Ksav, the written Torah, and then the Mishnah, that gives us, in brief, some spelling out of the details, but it still remains quite amorphous. And then the Gemara, where it really drives the point home and breaks it down into all the details. So if you remember, he gave the example earlier with a few examples, but one of them was Koyach HaTnua, the general idea that the human chai, misnaneya, something alive, is mobile. Second is a general movement, klali prati, of the head, the body, the legs. And the third was the actual details. So in the context of interface, where do you find most of the kus? So Chassidus explains in Teresh B'Ksav, precisely the reason that it's so not clear is because it's most focused there is you feel the divine. When you learn Chumash, you're not thinking, not learning something that's a logical, like a mathematical equation, or even the logic of halacha. The seichel that we use when we learn, especially Gemara, when you learn Chumash, yes, you can learn Chumash Pshut Shamikra, you learn Rashi, and there are questions, but it's questions in understanding the verse. The verses in Chumash, in the Teresh B'Ksav, are not written like an academic, intelligent structure. It's story form, it's cryptic. Even the laws are written in ways that are very, very concentrated. But what do you sense when you learn Chumash? If you may remember in volume 1, he said this, you feel elokus. And that's exactly, Haba Hatali, it's interdependent. Because it's one thing is there, the Gedusha of Elikus, that's common to words. Yes, you have words and you have mitzvahs, but it's still it's not been bislapshus in what you would call, let's say, if someone said to you, can you write a essay and in an encyclopedic way sum up Sefer Shemos or Parshas Vayishlach? Be very difficult to do. You could write the story. Vayishlach, Yaakov sends shluchim to Esav. They reconcile this and that, the whole discussion. But it's not a logical, it's a summary of a story, of a narrative. When you learn Gemara, Hilchos Shabbos, Sechta Shabbos, you can sum up into a structured thing. Here's a law. Here are the different opinions. Here's the consensus. So what's herzach more in Gemara is the Seichel Shabbazeh. Now we're told this is also part of God's wisdom. And Mishnah is in between. Mishnah has, because of its brevity, it has a certain element that's similar to the written Torah. On the other hand, because it's already being spelled out and the Gemara will dissect the Mishnah, so therefore it already is beginning to take on the shape of Seichel Adam. So therefore, if you think of it that way, so then think of Nekudah, Kav, and Shetach. So Shetach, once it's already our domain where we're using Svaras and Seichel back and forth, okay, it's not so much about sensing you don't exist. You sense, you're nullified. When you learn it, you're overwhelmed, like the candle, the light of the sun, by the sheer, this is what the Torah, this is Hashem's Torah, it's brilliant. So you're overwhelmed by the brilliance, but it's not about complete nullification of the existence because your seichel is part of the process. On the other extreme, when you're reading Torah Shebiksav, the Bitul is entire because you don't understand Torah Shebiksav. You start asking a question: why weren't we told 75 years about Avram's life until he's 75? You're not going to find an answer immediately. It's filled with, if you think of it from a point of view of critique, of let's call it Bible analysis, it's very hard to analyze the Torah Shebiksav because it's very random, seemingly. It's not necessarily flowing in a structure. It's not giving you enough logical arguments for you to say, well, I don't agree with this. Or not, I don't agree. I have a question about it. Your questions are going to be more about the story, not about the laws, because there's not enough said. In Gemara, it's dissected. You're talking now a body of a dialogue between scholars in understanding so-called the Constitution, the laws of Torah. So Seichel is very dominant there. In Chumash, the Seichel is necessary to understand Pshat. But like we say, Mikra, you could also, it's a person who doesn't, what's the expression? A person could also read Chumash and not understand one word, and it's still a mitzvah. In Gemara, if you don't understand, you're missing the whole thing. There's a question whether to read words of the Gemara still has value, but the focus there is understanding it. In Chumash, you can learn Chitas, you can read Kriyas HaTorah, and you Mekayim the mitzvah. Because it's Mikra. Mishnah is something in between. Mishnah has already a Seichel Shabbazeh, but it's not full. So Mishnah still, you could say, is radiating some of the Elikus. So Mishnah, you feel the Gedusha, and therefore you feel that the Oyer is there. There is now Oyer, it has substance. We can learn Mishnayos. Ben Esel Mishnah, Ben Chomesh Mikra, Ben Esel Mishnah. But yet you still feel that this whole thing is really only explaining the psukim of what the Eibishter wants from us. And in Gemara, there's much more focus on the Makabel. So you can basically say the three levels of Bittul is how much is the focus on the source. So in Torah Shebiksav, like Nekudah, Metzius, it's completely the source. In Gemara, the other extreme, the focus is more on us understanding it's Shetach. So the Oyer is bottle, but it's more headed Tfisus Mokim. And the middle stage, Kav, is where the Kav is an extension of the Nekudah, but it's an extension. So it's some type of interface between the point and the Shetach and the space. And that's called the Kiyum. Because now something has been established. You have now a substantial, a body of Mishnah. And yet it still remains somewhat amorphous and thus is in that middle level of Bittul, the Bittul of Ein Zuloscha, that its entire existence is dependent on the source. So it's three levels of how. Now remember, this is not really about us. I was applying it a little to us and our understanding. Here it's all within the Oyr. The Oyr, all of the levels are connected to the source. The question is what that connection entails. Is it the highest level of where it's entirely about the source, or is it already starting to relate to something, the existence is starting to relate to it as an existent Oyr, or is it something that's existent but it's completely dependent on its source? That's how I would add explanation to this whole point here. Yeah. Okay. Does anybody want to ask anything? Now would be a good time. I will finish the Maimer, might as well. And then, as we'll see, this is the end of the line in Tzadik Daled. The Frierdiker Rebbe did not continue anymore after this. At least not in ways that we received it. But before I finish the Maimer, does anybody want to ask anything? Any comments, anything? No? Okay. Fine. So now, if you remember, the reason I learned this beginning and end, because it's in this subject. The Maimer began, Efes Biltecha. So now he concludes and says, Val Pize Yuvan, according to this, we'll understand Mashakosov Efes Biltecha Goyalenu L'Yemes HaMashiach. So if you remember the beginning of the Maimer, he asked the question, he said that Efes Biltecha is connected to Mashiach. So he asked, oh, no, he didn't ask. He just said it's connected to Goyalenu. So he explains. The Rabbeinu Nishmosei Eden, Alter Rebbe, Mevayer explains, Bepedek Lamed Vov, it means in Tanya. In chapter 36 in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains, She'imesa Mashiach, Him Tachlis V'Shlemus B'riyas Elam. B'riyas Elam Hazeh. That Imesa Mashiach, the days of Mashiach, is the ultimate purpose and the perfection, the realization of this world, of our world, the creation of our world. Uba Pedek Lamed Zayin, and the next chapter, chapter 37 in Tanya, Mavayed, he explains, the Tachlis Hashlem Shal Yemesa Mashiach Toli B'Maseinu V'Avedesenu, that this ultimate purpose that will be fulfilled in the days of Mashiach is dependent on our work and our service and our avodah. Kol Zman Meshcha Golos, throughout the exile. Li Yesh, being the Bezman HaGolos Har Yesh Beis Mine Aveda, like he said in the beginning of the Maimer, in time of Golos there's two types of Aveda. Avedus HaBirurim, V'Aveda Denisyenus. So if you may recall on page 159, he explained, Birurim means that the physical reality exists, but it conceals the divine energy within it. So our work is to reveal the divine purpose in the material world. Nisyanus, he says, is just, there's nothing to reveal. The whole thing is just a test on the person that the sheker seems like true and it's not true. And there, the Aveda is by just avoiding and breaking the illusion. In Birur, it's about recognizing the divine sparks within existence. In Ayin, it's just getting rid of the mirage, the sheker that's deluding us. So he says now, okay, so because the Metzius and Kiyum, there's the two types of Aveda, Birurim, Aveda Denisyenus. Ubirday Sheti Aveda Kedeboy, and in order for the Aveda to be proper, you need to have while Yidei Hagdomas Aveda the Tefillah. you need to have the introduction, the preface of the service of davening. So now he's going to explain why we say this in davening. I thought he asked this question. Or he may have asked in the last Maimer. I remember somewhere a question he asked. What's in the Geya to that? Okay. So it starts with Akdam of Tefillah. Shat Tefillah, Sulam, Tefillah is like a ladder. Tefillah is a ladder. Hamakasher kol anyonim hagashmim lelakus, that connect and bind all physical matters to godliness. So we learned that in last week's Pasha. Hine, Sulam mutzav atzav v'reishim magia shamayim. It's that when Yaakov had the dream of a ladder standing on the ground, and its head, top of the ladder, is reaching into heaven. So Chazal say that's tefillah. It stands on the ground. The person who's davening is davening on earth, but he's elevating it all like a ladder to Elokus. So it's the ladder that binds and connects everything on the land. Yonim Gashmim Elokus. That's prayer in general. The tefillah Shabbos and the prayer of Shabbos, when we say Efes Biltecha and Ein Zuloscha, Hu me'ein hagilui deloselavi. Shabbos is like a taste and a me'ein, a type, a similar appetizer, a similar element of the Gilui deloselavi. Me'ein means like, not quite, but like. Ki yadua be'inyan mizmar shir liyem Shabbos. Like we hear Mizmor Shir Liyem Shabbos. We'll sing a song to the day of Shabbos, the Shabbos song. So Bapashtas, the Rebbe Tzeichen is raised sof Masechta Tamid because it says Liyem Shekule Shabbos Menucha L'chai Elamim. That's why he's bringing proof from that Shabbos is a taste. The 6 days of the week is the 6,000 millennia, the 6 millennia. And Shabbos is a taste of the 7th millennia Geula. So he says, "Hine al yedei aveda b'tefillah," through b'tefillah Shabbos, through the service of this prayer of Shabbos, mizbarchin kula yemin. All the days of the week are blessed from that. So he says like this. It says like b'tefillah Shabbos me'in this. He says, "Boyim lidei gilui emes." So through this tefillah of Shabbos, you come to the revelation of the truth. Ki hu yizbarach goyaleinu tamid. That God, blessed be He, is always our Redeemer. That's what Shabbos reveals. So that's why we say this tefillah on Shabbos, because tefillah gives the koyach to reveal the truth of the divine in existence. That God is always our Redeemer. Now, what does this have to do with the levels of Bittul? He doesn't connect them. He did say earlier that the Bittul helps us. The bottom of page, what did he say about Sheker Mechasas Emes? That reveals the truth of godliness in a world that conceals it. So that is a form of the Bittul that accomplishes that. Yeah. The Bittul of these the 3 levels of Bittul in this davening, in this prayer, help us come to recognize the truth of God within existence. That's essentially what he's saying. The bottom of page 160, he connected it to the Bittul that of the 3rd level, that you recognize that nothing but Atzmus, only a Elokus. That's Efes Biltecha. So the ultimate Bittul of existence. Okay. And there's only Elokus. With this, we finish the Tzadik Daled, and he says, At kan nimtza mehem shel zeh. Till here we find from this hemshech. We know that the Frierdiker Rebbe stopped saying and writing it at the time when somebody came and complained that it was too deep. The Rebbe was very upset. Well, what are you stopping the Rebbe from saying a mimer? And if it's too deep, you don't have to participate. The Frierdiker Rebbe, I heard, said that I want to give people avonim tevis and margolias, meaning precious stones, umavil sukerkes, and they want candies. Basically bemoaning the fact that he was giving here precious stones, deepest Chassidus, people want candies. So everything's ashgacha pratis. So this is what we have. So we conclude here on page 166, the third level of Bittul, and even the third level, if you look at Ayin Beis, he does not cover the last parentheses in the third level. So everything ends, if you look at Ayin Beis, the line that begins, Hu she'ena b'chinas Metzius klal, rakol Metzius hu ha'atzmus, page 1158, in Ayin Beis, is the last line that the Frierdiker Rebbe would cite and explain here in Tzadik Dalet. Okay. So we conclude this, and we're up to the third level. So what I would do now, unless you have questions, I would move back to Ayin Beis. We still have time. But maybe some of you might want to ask something, clarify anything. We've learned a lot here, but all the levels to explain this level 3. This whole mimer was just explaining level 3, as I pointed out. It basically covers around half a page on page 1158. So, anything? Anybody wants to say anything? Okay. Okay, my friends. So, if that's the case, I would move back to Ayin Beis, because I think I explained these things pretty extensively. So I'm going to close Tzadik Dalet. I'm going to go Ayin Beis, back to 1158. And never a moment so in Ayin Beis, I'm not going to go over the whole piece because this was all explained in Tzadik Dalet. I point out on the line, Hu she'ena b'chinas Metzius klal, on page 1158, you see a parenthesis is there. So I'm going to read the parentheses again now and try to explain it a bit. And then we move to Ofen HaDaled. And then when we finish this paragraph, what I'm going to do is we'll look at the Maimer B'yei Mashmini Atzeres Tavshin Tezvav from the Rebbe, where he brings these 4 levels of Bittul. So this parenthesis was not easy when we learned it the first time, but maybe now be easier to understand. You all with me? Okay.
Exactly where is the parentheses? Where?
I said the line begins, Hu she'ene b'b'chinas Metzius klal. Page 1158 in Ayin Beis. It's around 2/3 of the way down, a little less. Okay. So after explaining that this third level of Bittul is a level that mitzad Metzius rak ad yadvekus ba'atzmus al ken Bittul be'er hu she'eni b'chinas Metzius klal rak kol Metzius hu ha'atzmus. And the Frierdiker Rebbe explained what that meant. That kol Metzius is the atzmus. So he continues now in the parentheses. Ulefizeh, and according to this, k'moy b'Metzius hayesh, haBittul de'ein eid. Like we know there's a Bittul of ein eid in the Metzius of the Yesh. She says, similar to this Bittul, Nimtza Bittul Kazeh Gamba we find also this level, this type of Bittul also in the Oyer, and this is that Indian Ephes. So in other words, he's starting to equate and compare the Bittul of the Yesh to the Bittul of the Oyer, which of course is challenging to understand. But he did this before as well. If you go back earlier, that was the whole Shari Yichud V'Amunah. He said Yesh Leimer, and the Friedrich Rebbe elaborated on at length. He said Yesh Leimer, or Yesh Levayir, I should say. Yesh Levayir zeh, al pi ma shekosa b'sefer Rabbeinu, to explain this level of utter bittul, where the whole thing is only the koyach of atzmus. He said, let's explain it with the Shari Yichud V'Amunah, with the Yesh. That its entire existence is only the koyach halaki, the power of the divine, that creates it. And the Friedrich Rebbe actually broke it down to two parts in Shari Yichud V'Amunah. So it's all about God's power to create, as opposed to the focus on the creation. Same thing, the whole thing is that God's focus is expression of God, rather than that there's Oyer. That's what he's saying here. One second. Okay. The only difference he said earlier, and I think this needs to be qualified, that when it comes to the Yesh, the truth is, if we're able to see the divine energy, there would be no Yesh, it would be only divine energy. And the Yesh is completely bottled to that. But when it comes to Oyer, because Oyer is Ayin in the first place, it's not a Yesh. So that's why the Oyer reveals Atzmus. In the Yesh, it would be more, it reveals that it's not me, it's the power of the divine. But with Oyer, it reveals the Atzmus, because Oyer itself is Bitul. That's how he distinguished. But now he said, so therefore we have, similar to Ayin, which means that there's no real existence besides the divine energy. Same thing with the Oyer, but it's called Ephes. But now he's going to say something is explained elsewhere differently. That's what it looks like. It says, b'mokem acher muvur. B'mokem acher, elsewhere it's explained, the inyan Ayin hu dafke b'metzius Yesh dafke. That it's not, we just said that there's a bittul of Ayin, you have something like that also in the Oyer. But elsewhere it explains that is dafke in the Yesh. You don't have Ayin in Oyer. So now it's like gets reversed. But let's explain what this reversal is. That's trying to say that the Yesh is created with more bittul. It's through the avodah that the Yesh reveals that I have nothing. I'm not a Yesh, it's really God's, only God. The Oyer, on the other hand, because its nature is bittul, it does not, that's not a chiddush, that's a davar pashut, that the Oyer is bittul. And because the Oyer is bittul is not a problem. That's exactly what Oyer is there for, to reveal its source. Yesh is not here to reveal its source. But once you know and reveal the source, the Yesh has no standing of its own. So he says, Ulufia mavur kan. And according to what he says here, what's explained here, Yesh Leimer, we can say, why is it dafka in the Metzius Yesh? Why is Ayin only in the Metzius Yesh? He says, because mepnei shamitis keyach ha'atzmus hu b'savas hayesh dafka. Because it's only the true power of atzmus is revealed only when it creates a yesh ma'ayin, ve'efes ha'muchlet, she'ein le'ilah v'siba, that does not feel and sense any source or root or cause. Commotion is barely ill, like we learned earlier. Al kain, amitis abitul de'en hoid hu b'bchinas yesh dafka. So now he's saying, because the yesh has something does not have. Does not tell us that it must come from atzmus. It tells us it must have a source, but it doesn't tell us that the source has to be like atzmus. Because could also come from the sun. Just tells you there's a source. The paradox is, the yesh doesn't tell you it's a source. But that's why the yesh is revealing to you the real nature of atzmus that can be something that doesn't feel it has a source. That's why the mitzvah Bitul of Ayin, he says, hu b'chinas yesh dafka. And you can't say that on Mashenken hari lo zeu kol atzmus ma she'er nimtza memeno. Not all of atzmus, but comes from it. So does not reflect on a unique element of atzmus. Is just a reflection. So has the mila that it's natural bittul. That, yes, it's a revealer of a source. Yesh has the mila that it tells us something about the source. Ayin, that only the yesh can teach us that. Now, why is this relevant to this piece here? Not completely clear. I'm thinking maybe because he's trying to explain how the Bitul of and the Bitul of Yesh, remember, they're not the same because Yesh doesn't have natural Bitul. He's talking here through the Avodah of the Bitul HaYesh. And maybe he's trying to tell us what I said earlier, that ultimately you need them both together. Because the Yesh teaches us about Atzmus, and the teaches us about Bitul.
It's funny because before we learned that it was basically or is the one teaches about Atzmos more than anything, and it's source and everything. And now all of a sudden everything's reversed. It's quite confusing.
No, it's not confusing at all. Because we're not saying has nothing but Atzmus. But that does not mean that tells us what Atzmus is like. That's the key. It's Bitul. Yesh, because it's not Bitul, it tells us something about Atzmus. Because only Atzmus can create a Yesh.
Right.
If you talk about pure...
Yes, teaches about Atzmos. At its bad stage, when it's not Bitul, it teaches about Atzmos.
No, but the Yesh cannot do it without The Yesh doesn't tell us anything without And the doesn't tell us about real Atzmos without Yesh. That's what I'm trying to say. So the is a power of reflecting and revealing godliness. Now, when you want to know what kind of godliness it is, like, say, would be the artist. The artist has the ability to express himself. So you now know there's that expresses the artist. But when you see an artist create something that's so mind-blowing and amazing, it teaches you something about the artist, that the itself, or did not create that particular type of entity, would not reveal that to us. That's the point. So if you only have Yesh, you don't have Gilui. You don't know anything. You have no awareness. If you only have you don't know the quality of the source, but you have awareness of it. Yeah, you have to say something like that. I was just wondering what the parentheses comes to add. So first he says the has a bit like that.
Rabbi, are you saying that we would know the Bittul of Ayin Ode without or?
Absolutely. That's exactly why you need Or. It would be like saying, could you know what God wants of you if you don't have Torah Or? You just know that God created existence, a Yesh. The Yesh HaNivra we know comes from the Yesh HaMiti, but you wouldn't even know that. Knowledge and awareness, I said, Or is synonymous with awareness, with Gilui, with Bitul, with everything that allows us to grow. The Yesh is the product. The Yesh is not a revealer of anything. A Yesh on its own is like a stone, like an alien stone. You could say something created it, but that's about it. So the Yesh without Torah and mitzvahs, without the light that illuminates us, lives in the darkness. So the fact that it's created by Atzmus is a fact that we will not be ever aware of without Ur. That's why I said to look in the Sichos and Vayakel and the other places I referred to. And this goes back again and again to what I said. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. You're going to need to do a lot of thinking, a lot of learning to get wrap your head around this. Because the Yesh is a non-revealer. The Yesh is the opposite. I am a Yesh. That's what Yesh means. Just look in the mirror, you'll know what a Yesh is. Or is the gift that God gives us that says, oh, you have some awareness of something that's not about you. And you're able to climb and learn and grow. Do you remember when we learned that the whole Atzilus is created in order to bring Yedias Elikus and a Hergish Elikus? Why do we need Atzilus? Because without the Giluyim of Elikus, we're never going to get there. The Yesh is a self-contained, selfish reality. Self-Yesh, selfish. So, of course, that's why we have the Giluyim, we must have the Giluyim. We talked about difference between Meraglim and Keirach and so on.
So what will we be able to equate the third level of Bittul to some level of...
We're back to mathematics, huh?
Yeah, it doesn't hurt. It gives you a grasp of what you're talking about, you know?
By me, it more than hurts. To me, it's like missing the whole point, actually.
I don't think so. I don't think the same way that you do in that area, you know? To me, it helps quite a bit. Because right now we're saying Edo Milvado is the same idea of knowing that everything is total.
First of all, it doesn't say Milvado, it just says Ein Od.
As I said that, I realized that. Ein Od. But here we're equating Ein Od with total knowledge that everything is Elokus. And now we're going to say that total knowledge
by the Yesh is through, but you missed the most important line. By the Yesh, it comes through Avodah and the need for Oyer. And by the Oyer, there's no Avodah. Oyer has it natural. That's the key difference. You must include that line in there or else the whole thing falls apart.
I missed that then. Why?
Because the Yesh is a Yesh. Look at what people are. There are 8 billion Yeshes in this world. Who's thinking about God?
Okay, but you need to work on it to make it mamish a reality.
No, but that's only that little statement happens to be the whole story. That's the purpose. The Yesh by definition is a Yesh, not a Gilui. It's not Bitul. A Yesh says Ani va'afsi eid, I and nothing else. Period. That's why I'm telling you it's not mathematics. You have to come to terms that the Yesh yells, I exist and nothing else. It's selfish, it's brutal, it can be hurtful, abusive, everything that a Yesh is capable of. That's called Tachtenim. So the fact that the Alter Rebbe was Mechadish and told us that the Yesh, to have such a Yesh, you need Atzmus, that itself is a Gili Oyer. That's a Gili. That's the only Torah can tell you that. We can never come to that on our own.
Right.
We would say the opposite, actually, that the Yesh is opposite of Elikus. Everything about the Yesh opposes God. Because I say, I exist, I'm a more important than you. Listen, people who are complete faith in God, do they live up to Hini Hashem Nitzav Alav? That 24/7, they are aware of God and therefore they're not doing one bad thing? Why is that not the case? Because the Yesh, by definition, is a concealer. It's been concealed, and so that's the Yesh. Oyer is the exact opposite. Kol Oyer is only Gilui. There's nothing but Elikus. It's just a question which level of Bittul. Hedet Tfises Mokim, or Ein Zoloscha, or Efes Biltecha. But that's what Oyer is. That's why I keep saying it's the Dveikus Ba'amokir. Yesh has no Dveikus in the Mokir. Even Kalim, it says Dveikus Ein Nikeres. Yesh has no Dveikus. However, God said, I blessed you with a neshama, which is Oyer, Ner Hashem Nishmasoda. I bless you with a Torah Eir, Ner Mitzvah v'Torah Eir. Use the Oyer I give you and let that guide you. Let it teach you. And let it become a force that trains and sublimates the Yesh. And then you'll discover that the Yesh has something that the Oyer doesn't even have. That's where it turns around. Okay, so you have to, without this statement that I just said, this whole thing would make totally no sense. And that's, okay. I am just struggling here to understand both aspects to it. Remember when he started, he said that Naveda in level 2, remember? He said, what is the Bittul of Ein Zoloschen Naveda? He said, is the Hizbonenus of Magadlu Masecha, Marabu Masecha, Magadlu Masecha. And we even discussed it. Why is he going to Nivroim? He's talking about Ur. So I explained because he's saying the whole purpose of Ur is to teach Nivroim what Bittul is. And then he explained how we come to such a Bittul through our contemplation about God's presence. Remember that everything is God. God is everything. But Ur is always going to be a higher level. Then comes the third level, which teaches us, in the third level, it appears that there's a similarity in the Yesh, but not without Aveda. It's just the reality is that the Yesh has no existence without Elikus. That's what he says in Shiur v'Amunah. But we're not aware of it. That's why he said the difference. This is Bittul, and this is awareness. When it comes to the Nivroim, they're Batul b'Metzius. When it comes to the Oyer, it's only Megala Atzmus. The Nivra never is Megala Atzmus. The Nivra either conceals Atzmus or it doesn't exist as a Nivra. Anyway, let's stop here. We'll talk about it some more. Process. So we're back on page 1158. Just did the parentheses again. I need to think about it a lot, this parentheses. He's definitely talking about the both sides of the coin here. It's just very bekitzer.